like, I think they tried their best to just be like, hey, this is the reality of what he said and what he did, and like successes, failures. This is what his family was like, those kinds of things. Yeah. Is there anything else you had to add there?
Just let's talk about the house now.
Yeah, so the house is really nice. I thought, anyways, that they did a pretty good job of like preserving it.
Yeah. He only lived there for like the first like couple years of his life.
Oh, it looks like we dropped for a minute, but
Okay.
it's okay. We're back.
Yeah, he only lived there for the first couple years of his life. His dad was a minister at the local, I believe it was Presbyterian church. He was a local minister there, and then eventually he moved down to Georgia for his dad, because his dad got a much better paying minister job down there, which totally makes sense, kind of need money. And it was the house, it was really well done. They had a lot of objects that were there when Woodrow Wilson lived there, like from the bed he was born in, to like, well, and they had a lot of like similar timing, similar era stuff, like that. Like the kitchen table was like from the era and stuff. And what was interesting was that they had his. They mentioned that his family was like, as part of the dad being like the minister, got like one of the local farmers like rented some like slaves to the family as part of them being like the minister.
Right.
The tour guide said they have no idea who the farmer was. They have no idea who the names of the slaves. They just know that there were like 30 slaves rented from the local farmer. That's like all they know.
Yeah, it was kind of tragic not to be able to follow up on those stories and see what happened.
Yeah, because like that's like one interesting thing that I like learning. I'm like, oh, like what are like the lesser known stories around these like famous people?
Yeah, like we talked about this in a different video, but in Blenheim House, they were able to track down some of the soldiers that wrote their names there, and we know like, hey, this guy after the war, he went on and opened up a shop and like lived to be 70, or like. Yeah, unfortunately, this guy died in the next battle. But it is really unfortunate when it's like, yeah, we know that this person existed. We just don't know what they did, or like even who they were in some instances. Like there was someone here, don't know who it was, so I can't tell you what happened to them, which is unfortunate. But yeah. And it was funny. They did tell a story about how he came back to town, and someone wanted him to stay at the house. They even offered him his old room and old bed. And he decided not to because he was concerned about, the public coming over and, like, he wouldn't be able to get anything done because they'd be harassing him.
And, like, them looking in the window and being creeps, so...
Right, and, like, it's not that he doesn't want to meet Americans so much as, well, like some privacy, right?
Yeah, he's like, I want my sleep. Like...
Yeah, and that's completely understandable. Like, if that's going to be a problem, yeah, I would also agree with that sentiment, right? But that was interesting to hear... that little tidbit. I thought that was cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, I think we're good with that one.
Yeah.
The last place we went to on our honeymoon was James Madison's Montpelier, which is in Montpelier Station, Virginia. And we took a house tour, and it was really cool because they had like these little 2D like cutouts of James Madison and Dolly Madison like doing stuff.
Yeah, they like in the dinner table, for instance, because James Madison was very much a not a social person. He didn't like parties and stuff like that. He very much was like, hey, like I will talk to you one-on-one and we will have a very intellectual discussion and it'll be fantastic. But like put me in a room with 20 people and I'm not going to know what to do. Like I just want to talk to one person at a time. Like, maybe I'll make my rounds, but like, I'm not going to go and talk to like everyone at the same time or anything like that, right? I'm not the entertainer. Whereas his wife was very much like, I got this. I will plan it. I will socialize, So they were talking about like the cutouts specifically. Like she would set it up so James would be next to the person he needed to talk to or the people he needed to speak to the most. And then everyone else at the table, it was her job to entertain them. and she really enjoyed it. So it wasn't even a job; it was just something she loved doing.
Yeah, she was definitely a lot more like outgoing of the two.
And if I remember correctly, she already had children, and they never had children again.
Yeah, so Dolly had been married previously, but her husband died. I believe it was of smallpox. I think it was small. It's some disease. I believe it was smallpox. And so she had kids with her first husband, but she and James Madison never had kids together. But he helped her raise her kids. George Washington did something similar because Martha Washington had been married previously, and her first husband died. I believe Martha Washington's first husband had a heart attack, and so he helped raise her kids. And actually, one of Martha Washington's granddaughters married Robert E. Lee. So.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest takeaways from these visits was like, you know, we hear James Madison, we hear George Washington, we hear Thomas Jefferson, but like, not in every case, but in a large amount of these cases, there's like phenomenal people in their family that we never hear about. And James Madison's case, like Dolly Madison, despite having an extremely large impact on James Madison and, you know, affairs of state because she just did so much and was such a social person and like really good at that, she had a huge amount of influence and a huge amount of like impact. We just don't really hear about her terribly much.
Yeah, the only time I really remember learning about her in school was, she saved like a couple things or a couple items, including a portrait of George Washington when the War of 1812 broke out, and so we're like, hey, let's burn down Washington. So like that's the only time I really remember hearing her about school.
Yeah, and like it's interesting to me because I'm like, it's very important. Like if you're getting the highlights, I kind of understand where they're coming from. Like, hey, we don't have time to go over everything. But I think it's a hugely missed opportunity to not be like, hey, by the way, we don't have time to talk about this, but you should like pick up a couple books on Dolly Madison because she's fascinating.
Yeah, she's
like the amount of impact that she had both on James himself and on U.S. policy and like interacting with foreign dignitaries, etc., is incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would highly recommend that. Like, not only should you visit these places, but like read about their families, read about Dolly Madison, read about Martha Washington, because like they also lived fascinating lives, or other people in their orbit that we don't really hear about terribly much, like Thomas Jefferson. I cannot remember the name to save my life right now. His mistress, the slave that he took.
Oh, Sally Hemings.
Thank you. She had a very fascinating life, and is a fascinating person, and like you don't really hear too much about that, right?
It's really weird. Okay, don't even give. Like, it's first off, like, don't have slaves. Don't have relationships with your slaves. But Sally Hemings was also his wife's half sister.
Yeah,
that's just really weird. Don't have relationships with your half sister. Your wife's half sister, that is. Also, don't have relationships.
Or your half sister, yeah.
Yeah, but don't have relationships with your half sister. But wife's half sisters having a relationship with after your wife dies is kind of weird too.
But yeah, that was one of the highlights to me was like going to these places and being like, hey, did you know that this like James Madison's wife was like this much of an influence? I'm like, I had no idea. Like like you said, I knew about her saving a lot of very valuable American artifacts from the White House before it got burned down. But I had no idea that she did so much to impact James Madison on the back end in terms of like helping be the social aspect of the presidency, right?
Right.
And even after the presidency and before the presidency, she was always the social one that he was not. And it really worked out well because he was like, and she was very intellectual too, but like he was much more the intellectual type where it's like I want to have like one-on-one discussions. And like she's incredibly smart, but she can also do the social aspect, right?
Yeah.
He did not have that social acumen of like, ooh, I can host a party. It was like, I can, but like,
why?
I'd much rather just sit down with Thomas Jefferson and have a chat for the next half an hour, or whoever I need to talk to, right? Maybe it's John Adams or Washington or Franklin or whoever it is, right? He was very much not the social person, and she was like, hey, I'm incredibly smart and I'm really good at social, like boom, Like, this is literally like the best hostess you've ever had because she's incredibly smart and she's really good at like, you are seeming bored. Let me go get you attention, right?
Yeah.
But what they said was interesting to me was that like she was literally like the highlight of the party. Like, people were just wrapped up in her, so they didn't even notice that James Madison is talking to somebody and not paying attention to them because Dolly Madison is so interesting and so good at running the party.
Yeah. And one interesting thing I learned about this time was that she was born into the Society of Friends. They're also probably better known as the Quakers. And at the time it was very taboo, like to be a Quaker and like a slaveholder, like you were oftentimes like kicked out of the Quakers. And so she and her first husband were Quakers, and then when her first husband died, she fell in love with James Madison, who was very much not a Quaker, and he was also a slaveholder. And because he was a non-Quaker slaveholder, she gets disfellowshipped from the Society of Friends. So she gets kicked out because she marries James Madison. I thought that was interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I can't remember what church she ended up going to.
It was probably I want to say it was Episcopalians.
But
if I had to guess,
I wish I had it, but I can't remember who it was. But somebody introduced the two of them, and they just hit it off like immediately.
Yeah.
Which was also kind of funny. Yeah. So I think that wraps us up today.
They did talk a lot about the butler. His name is Paul Jennings, and they also had one of the little 2D statues of him in the dining room.
Yeah, he was again another person in their orbit that very smart guy, very socially good, very politically inclined. He went on to do some crazy interesting things even after James Madison passed away.
Yeah, he was very, very interesting slave. So.
Yeah, I can't remember if he became free after he died.
I don't remember either.
But he's also another figure that I would say warrants looking into in terms of if you want to know some fascinating history, that guy has a fascinating life.
Okay.
He was involved in a lot of things. It was very, very, very interesting hearing about that, and I kind of wish we had more time to talk about him too, because again, it's kind of one of those things where you're here at you're here at Jefferson's house, but and Jefferson's an interesting guy. James Madison's very interesting. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying here's this other figure in their life that is fascinating, and yet we don't have the information to share with you. What are you doing?
Oh.
We don't have the background information to tell you more about them, right? We don't have. In many instances, there wasn't a house for them, so there is no dedicated place to go to learn about that person, even though that person had a fascinating life. I think, again, it's one of those things where, with history, it's kind of you got the highlights, and then you got the highlights plus, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of things around the highlights that are very fascinating, too. But unfortunately, we don't have the time, funds, or capability to record, have a physical location for every single person that was, this interesting. But certainly those are some people that I would throw out if you want to learn more.
Yeah.
Those
we
are the people to look at.
We also went to the cemetery while we were there.
Yeah.
And they also have a slave cemetery.
Yeah. Again, this was another gorgeous location.
Yeah.
Absolutely stunning views, beautiful house. Yeah.
Yeah. We had fun.
It was really, really nice. It was really well done. And I would say at every place we went, they did a very good job of hey, you want to learn more? Here's where you should go next. Here's what you should look at next. Yeah. And they did a very good job being we want you to be more excited about history after you've been here than when you got here, right?
I forgot what the tour guide's name was, but she was really funny.
Yes.
She's she started off the tour by being first off, I want to make sure you all know where you are, because we get a lot of people that are confused. She's James Monroe did not live here. James Madison lived here. We are not at Monticello. We are at James Madison's Montpelier. So, which I totally get that. I've worked in museums before, and people get very confused sometimes.
Right.
So.
Right. So, unless you have anything else,
right.
I'm all done.
Me too.
All right. Until next time, thank you so much for tuning in.